the Sabbath and work, okay? The Sabbath shows us that work is important, but it's not everything. We are not made human only through our work. We are made human through God's creation us as being in His image. Do you agree with that? Be still, Psalm 42:10, and know that I am God. We need work, but we also need stillness. Cease from work, Sabbath, a time for contemplation, recreation, and also relationship. We don't really know God. We can't meet Him in the same way if we are not still. And the shorter catechism says the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever, which is really the reason for Sabbath. We cease work so we can enjoy God. Okay, so take a look at this one. Sabbath in the middle, work, relationship, rest, enjoyment. Humanity is the divine image bearer. As it says in Genesis 1, if we have a relationship with God and that's primary, it must be nurtured and maintained. So we have to find the time to have this relationship. So work is secondary. Work is important, but there is a relationship with God that is primary. If we are in God's image, we should act like God did. And He Sabbathed, if you like, on the seventh day. The Sabbath was for God, but it also was, as we are in God's image, must be for humanity. And there are some practical implications for this. The church, the evangelical church, is starting to think about this, but it's one aspect of life that it has not handled well. That is in our pews, in our congregations. There are probably more people involved in work than are, RETIRED, retired, or at school. And are their needs being addressed? How do we explain them a theology of work, or even more importantly, a theology of Sabbath? And I challenge those of us who are pastors here. How do we understand Sabbath? Ask people today, what is the Sabbath? Anybody here just mentioned about Sabbath?
We're supposed to honor God all the time in all the things that we do, but Sabbath is set aside strictly for God.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay.
Sabbath is like a rest day and keep it holy.
Yeah, holy. Okay. Pastors, probably some of them probably would say, well, we've changed from Judaism to Christianity. So Sunday is our Sabbath. How? How do you approach this with our pastor staff?
Jeff, dun sa may bintana nyo gisingin.
When Sunday
sa likod
is
sa may
their
bintana.
most active day. Make sense? Do you agree with that? How do you approach with our pastor staff when Sunday is their most active day? How do you Sabbath? There's some good.
But the whole point of the Sabbath is to honor God. So and the pastors are fulfilling that role when they're doing their services.
Right. But he's still working. There are some, good books on this. One I recommend is, say the Marva Dawn, where she, addresses in aspects of Sabbath. But it is something that we need to, preach and teach more. Sabbath can be different in different contexts. A church member once approached a pastor's wife and expressed his displeasure, saying that she's working on the Sabbath. He had seen her gardening and considered it labor. In response, she asked him about his profession, to which he replied that he was a farmer. She then explained that she was a teacher and that while gardening was part of his daily labor, for her it was a form of relaxation. This example illustrates that the concept of Sabbath rest can vary, V-A-R-Y, depending on a person's profession and daily work. Briefly just touch it as Rick mentioned, what constitutes work for one person may serve as rest for another. Therefore, it is important to develop a theological understanding of the Sabbath that considers individual context and allows for a more nuanced approach to rest. Yahweh and Adam. Okay? This is the story, Toledoth, or just, I don't know which in accents, Toledoth. This is crucial important term. Okay, don't forget. Toledoth. We now move to the Genesis 2, chapter 2, starting in verse 4, the middle of verse 4, okay? And again, we'll look at this chapter like we did the first chapter in some depth because it is so foundational to understanding the rest of the book and the rest of Scripture. In the middle of verse 4, it says, this is the story. This is the history. This is the narration. The Hebrew word is Toledoth. Okay? It's related in Hebrew to the English word, what's that? Genealogy. Okay, don't forget. Toledoth. The birth narratives, the lines of family history. And this particular term, occurs 11 times in Genesis. And it serves as a, structuring element. It separates the book into different sections. And it mentions here in this verse, it is Toledoth, okay? The story of the heavens and the earth. And the, order of those words refers back to chapter what? 1 and verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Are you following me? Okay, so we have a beginning and ending of this narrative section with the same word order, the same two words. And then we've got a new section beginning at verse 4, the second half, because I would argue that they reverse the word order. They talk about the earth and the heavens. Interesting. This should indicate that there's a new section starting here, and the story goes on from there. And when we read chapter 2, we notice that there's a change in the name that is used for God. In Genesis 1, we discussed earlier that the word God or Elohim is used Here in chapter 2, we are introduced to Yahweh, which is the personal name of God in Hebrew. It is equivalent of YH, either V or WH, the four-letter word of holiness. This is an intimate covenant name of God. It is the name of relationship. It is, if you like, God's first name. Israel calls God Yahweh. Other nations cannot, because they are not in a personal relationship with God. Name of covenant. Now the Jews traditionally, avoid using this name. One of the 10 Commandments is, what's that? Do not use the name of Yahweh your God in vain. So the one way they say, we will not use it in vain. We will not say it at all. We will instead use the Hebrew word of Lord. Okay? And that's why in most of your English translation, you will see in small caps, okay? Lord, Lord, lowercase. English does the same thing as the Jews do. They don't want to use the personal name itself, but whenever you see Lord in small caps, okay, you know that the Hebrew behind it is Yahweh. Now in King James Version, for example, the name is rendered as Jehovah. We are not sure exactly how the name is pronounced because it has been not used for a number of years, but I would argue that it is not pronounced Jehovah, because what we know in this name of Jehovah is the combination, a combination. We've got the consonants of Yahweh, okay, consonants, and the vowels of the Hebrew word for Lord. Anyway, moving back to the text itself, the way it is structured from the middle of verse 4 to 7, okay, verses 4 to 7, we have subordinate clauses. This had not yet happened. That had not yet happened. These are, stage directions before the players come on. In verse 7, they come onto the stage, and in this case, the hero, is the man Adam. And there's, wordplay here that comes through in the Hebrew. One of the reasons why everybody should take Hebrew. It says Adam is made from the word Adama. But the human being is made from the earth, the soil. Absolutely, you agree with that. It's mentioned. We could make the same kind of wordplay in English. Human comes from humus, H-U-M-U-S. That's a bad wordplay because they are based on different Latin roots. But the sound comes through, much like we have in a Adam and Adama. The picture of God created here in Genesis 2 is different than it is in Genesis 1. It has God forming with his hands. The term that's used in Hebrew is like clay being formed by a potter. The picture is of God getting his hands dirty. There's an intimate, direct involvement with creation here. So it is interesting we have the intimate, personal, first name of God, if you like, and then we have an intimate relationship in creation. God still has authority as molding and shaping humanity at his rules, but he is right down working in the dirt, if you like, in his making of human being. For humanity, it is important to know that, here, that the physical body is significant because God crafted it. We are incarnate beings, our body, and what we do with our body is important. In the New Testament period, there's a group called Gnostics, pronounce it, Gnostics, okay, Gnostice, Gnostic. And their view is that the body is unimportant. It is the soul that is important. So whatever we do with our body, you can be a ascetic, ascetic, not eating, depriving yourself, but that's not important. You could be promiscuous, promiscuous, get what? Drunk, sleep with prostitutes. It did not matter what happened with your body, because if the body is unimportant, what you do with it is unimportant. But for a Judeo-Christian view, the body is a part of who we are. We are embodied beings. And in this picture of creation, life or the human body is derived from the very breath of God. That makes sense. The garden and the limitation of freedom. Look at the picture here. The garden is river. It's just flowing here and flowing here. You see the name here? You see that, right? There's a name of the 4 different rivers.
It's too blurry to read.
Oh, really? Okay. Oops. You see that? Still blurry?
Yes.
Oh, let me just expand. The screen is small. Okay. Big challenge.
Yeah, we know the 4 names of rivers: Tigris, Euphrates, Gihon.
I try to increase the screen, not so that you could see the better view.
Yeah.
That's
It's
better.
better now.
Okay. You see that? Is it okay? Still small?
Okay. Well, it's not the size, it's just blurry.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, anyway, the garden. Garden is river. Sorry about that. I try to make, better view. It's blurry. It's a limitation of a Zoom class, or unless we just meeting together face to face, there's, some things still going on like this. It's literally. Okay. All right. So look at the garden. We now come to the garden in chapter 2, which is talked about in verses 8 through 9, and then again in verses 15 through 17. It is the place of human activity in the world at this particular stage of the story, where humans act as co-regents. God creates and cares for things, and we are to follow. But we do so in different ways. We produce new things in different ways than God did. It might be economic production of capitals capital and goods and wealth. It might be creation through means of self-expression in art and music and literature, but these are all reflective of God's creation, but they are not identical or completely parallel to what God does. But this activity takes place in the garden. Okay? River, look at the 4 different rivers. Okay? Remember the river's name. And in the middle of the garden story, in verses 10 through 14, we have 4 rivers. And this indicates in this story that the human being is central to the story. Because these 4 rivers are singled out, because they related to the garden, and the garden is where the man is. They don't just pick random 4 rivers, they just pick the 4 that are related geographically to him. Now 2 of these rivers are unknown to us at the present time. These are called Pison and Gihon. Pison and Gihon, these 2 ones. Okay. But there are 2 that are known, Tigris and Euphrates. These 2 ones were known, but not these 2. We know these 2, but they still exist now. They exist now. And we could ask the question, by which river might the writer of this story have lived? It is an interesting kind of question, and a way to approach this is, what are the known and unknown words? That is, the writer explains the Pison and Gihon, even talks a little bit about the Tigris, having to explain a little bit about it, but he just mentions the last 4th is Euphrates. So you could argue that when he wrote, he was writing to a group, and maybe he was among the group himself that lived on a Euphrates River, so they did not have to explain it because it is already known. Limitation to freedom. What comes up after the description of the formation of the garden and the placement of man, there is a limitation placed on human freedom. In chapter 2:16, it says, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden. I'm giving you," says God, "the gift of everything that is necessary to sustain life. You have what you need, but I'm going to place one restriction on it in verse where? Remember, 17. But you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When you eat from it, you will certainly die." Verse 17, okay? The knowledge of good and evil, possibly this is another merism. We talked about a merism earlier on heaven and earth. Good and evil might be another way of saying, I will give you all knowledge, or in this case, I don't want you to eat of this tree of all knowledge. Whatever it means, there is a reality to the vertical relationship that we saw before, between us and God, where God is at the top of hierarchy of authority, and we as human beings are under his authority, under his control, and under his command. And this is a restriction that God as ultimate authority is placing on humanity. One of the things that this limitation to freedom shows that there is an objective reality of moral absolutes. there is a real objective right and wrong, the Enlightenment brought relativism, and it is rampant today, saying what is okay for you might not be okay for me. We can base morality on our ideas. There is no absolute morality. You could argue from the Genesis account that human conscience knows that there is a right or wrong. One writer has said that conscience is a moral signal of transcendence. The fact that we have a conscience must indicate that there is a God. Now these moral boundaries were established by God. That's what it says in Genesis. And from this, we'd argue that they are for our good. It might not be clear for us why they're there, but they're not just arbitrary. God doesn't explain everything to the human being as Job found out, Job. But they are not just by whim. There is a reason, the real reason for them being there. And one suggestion is that it might not always be apparent that God is in the garden. 3:8, it says, what's that? God is walking in the garden. We would argue that theologically, God is everywhere at all times. But from the human perspective, they might not know of God's presence. But what faith or integrity is living by God's word, even if we don't understand why it is given, even when God seems to be absent from the garden. So there is one of the reasons I would argue for this restriction being placed here. There's no explanation of it, but we have to learn to live in, if you like, naive trust in the God who created and made us and all things for our good. Search for fellowship. Look at this structure. It's still blurry, right? Oops. Let's do it again. Oop. Blurry. Better? You see that?
Yeah, that's better right there.
Okay. Let's go and back and forth. Being alone. Genesis 1, just look at the picture first. Yahweh first, hierarchy, okay? Ontological. Yahweh, God, creator authority. Underneath, what's that? Human being. Underneath, human, the animals and plants. So this is a structure. God, we, and underneath, animals and plants. This structure. So being alone, Genesis 2:18 and 20 turn to the whole idea of fellowship. And it's interesting, it says in Genesis 1:31 that everything was very good when it left God's hand. But then we get to chapter 2:18, it says it was not good for man to be alone. Now, what does being alone mean? We have the hierarchical relationship that we've seen a minute ago, right? The picture. We'll just return to that in a minute, but how is man alone? God is there. The animals and plants are there. What does it mean for him to be alone? I will give a chance to answer for that. Anybody? Nobody.
He can't. Adam can't see God's face, so he in that sense, he's alone and doesn't have a partner that he can see.
Oh, God is walking in the garden. Rick.
Yeah. But he's walking in the garden, but that doesn't mean that you can see his face.
Anybody? Thank you. No answer. Yeah.
Yeah. For my side, I think with God is a spirit. We can more likely connect with him in the spirit. But then when he said it's not good for a man to be alone, he wanted a man to have a partnership with somebody of his own. I don't know, they have the same, they can communicate and they can see each other like that.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Amen.
I think being alone is
Oh, one more. Okay.
was not just physical state, but Adam, like he really needs someone to share with life with, I think.
Yeah. Good.
Maybe that's why
Okay.
God
Ashit.
thought, because God thought that it is not good Adam to be alone, so he wanted to make a helper for him to like manage all the.
Thank you. Okay, good. All of you. I appreciate that. Okay. Just kind of, it's kind of, you just summarize all together in different aspects of the thing that to be answered for the answer. There is an area of philosophy called ontology, which is the study of the nature of being. And what this could be saying is no one is like him ontologically. No one has the same nature as him. Going back to our hierarchical structure, okay? Hierarchical structure, no one has the same level as the man. So God seeks to address this by making a helper suitable for him. Okay, as you mentioned. This would be somebody who stands beside him, not above him at a level authority over him or below him, but at his side, because really to be human is to be in relationship. The focus of relationship. What does it mean for him to be alone? A missionary once, shared his experience of working with African communities, where he encountered a profound difference in the way people understood individual identity. He had been accustomed with the Western emphasis on personal autonomy, where faith is often seen as a private decision. However, in this new culture context, he witnessed how baptism was not merely an individual choice, but a communal event. When somebody decided to be baptized, and the entire family and even the village participated in affirming that one's faith was not just personal, but deeply embedded in the community. This challenged his previous assumption of help him see that the modern Western notion of the isolated individual is not universal. Instead, he realized that the human existence is inherently relational, and faith in many cultures is lived out in the context of shared identity and communal belonging. And animals. The fellows first one need of community, right? The second is animal. Are you following me? And what we have here in these verses is a search for fellowship. God says, animal parts, it is not God. Okay, let's go back. Here, this picture. Okay, human being and animal, ontologically equal. Okay, just check it out. Here, yeah, animal. God says, animal. What we have here in these verses is a search for fellowship. God says what? It is not good for man to be alone. So God brings the animals to Adam, and I don't think God, was doing this, made a mistake that he was wanting Adam to look at them to say, okay, these are good, I named them, but they're, on the wrong ontological level. They're not like me, since I named them. I have authority over them. I have the ability to categorize them, but they're not like me. I'm exercising the sovereignty given by God. The animals are good. After all, the dog's name's best friend, but they don't quite make it as suitable helper. So again, not that God made a mistake here, but God wanted to teach Adam the relationship between himself and the rest of the creation, woman. Okay, we just keep fellowship, searching for the fellowship, person, community, and animals, women. So then, on the scene comes the woman. There's somewhat of the wordplay here in English, man and woman. We have the same. It is not really a wordplay, but in Hebrew, the word for man is ish, and the word for woman is just adding a feminine ending on it, isha, isha. So that ish is related to isha as man is to woman. The woman is brought, and now we have a relationship, because the story of the garden is really all about relationship. But here the relationship is between sexes. And Adam, when he sees the woman, he said, this is a flesh of my flesh, right? And bone of my bones. What he's saying here is not using the philosophical terms. This is ontologically the same as me. This is me. This is the kind of relationship that I need somebody at my level. So hierarchical relationship that we have here, we see that, so the structure, the picture, we have God at the top in authority, right? And then we have the human beings on the same level, male and female, both ontologically the same category, right? And then below them, we have the animals and the plants. So fruits and fellowship as well. Here, you can see the purple colors all together. So one of the reasons for creation is fruitfulness. The first command given is to be fruitful and multiply, which, by the way, the first command that was given, it is the only one we really kept since then. But it shows the importance of sexuality and the importance of fellowship. Fruitfulness and fellowship, neither one is possible with only the one man by himself. So God was intimately involved in getting his hands dirty, if you like, working with the clay to form a man. To form the man, right? Not and form the man. Working with the blood, if you like, performing surgery to form the woman. He was ultimately evolved in the creation of both sexes. Ever. Okay, how many, the fellows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, find a helper. Just to, comment on Genesis 2, 18, where he says, I will make a helper suitable, or King James Version, I will make a help meet. Another word for helper, ezer in Hebrew. Very popular word. I want you to memorize ezer, okay, helper. What does it mean? When you think of a helper, ezer, it's kind of negative connotation, a apprentice. We've got the licensed journeyman, then apprentice that does the scut work on the side, but that's not what we have in Hebrew for the word helper, ezer. Okay, for example, in Exodus 18:4, it says, what's that? My father's God is my helper. It is not servant, it's not slave. Because God is this in some what? In some verses. It's not a negative connotation, but what it is talking about here is this similarity and supplementality. No. Supplementarity. We both put our shoulders together to do the work. We are standing beside each other to accomplish God's goals, not one standing behind the other. And as you said, he says, the woman, he says what? Oh, whatever it is termed, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. He values her for himself, for herself, not for childbearing. There's no childbearing mentions there, right? Like Eve, Adam and Eve, his wife Eve, probably, do you think she has a belly? Just think. So what we have is somebody created like him. We have a creation account for the world as in now exist humans and animals, but also a male and female. So relationship and community are part of this good creation. And we have to remember that we are not created to be alone, but to be in fellowship. So mentioned, those are kind of fellows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? Let's move to segment 26, the woman and the serpent. The serpent, we now come to Genesis 3, where we have an encounter between the woman and the serpent. And then notice that the serpent approach to the woman. He doesn't come to her and initially say, why don't you sin? I want to seduce you away from God. He knows that he and she would not listen to this. What he really says is, let's talk theology. It is what God really said. Did he really mean this? What's he doing? What's he doing? He's getting the woman to question God. The serpent seems to be claiming to know more than God does. And we've got there an inherent problem, attack. The whole attitude of attack is attacking the relationship between the creator and the creature. The hierarchical relationship that we've seen before with God at the top and then the human beings. What serpent is suggesting is that the woman stepped up on level. Did God really say this? Can you trust him? Why don't you make your own decisions? Why don't you step up above your level, below God, to take God's place? And his approach again, he engages her in conversation, and then only after they become involved, they calls God a liar. So the truth becomes a lie, and a lie becomes the truth. God calls for faith and trust, not common sense. The serpent seems to be asking, use your own common sense rather than using your trust in God. One aspect that I found interesting in this story, relating to what we talked about a couple of times previously, were the names of God that are used in the story. Now the narrator at the beginning of verse 1, the narrator also speaking 8 through 14 talks about the Lord Elohim or Yahweh God. Remember, Lord in the small caps is Yahweh, the personal name of God. So when the narrator is speaking, he has a relationship with God. So he uses the word Lord now in dialogue with the serpent in the last part of the verse 1 to 5. When Eve is talking about the serpent, look at the different word. Very interesting. They use the word Elohim. Why don't they use the word Yahweh? Because they have that before and after. Are you following me? You just they use the word Elohim. The serpent is not in personal, intimate relationship with God. Make sense? He is not in the image of and likeness of God. He has no place using God's first name in conversation. So the author is specifically differentiating between those who have a relationship with God and those who are not, who don't. Okay? That's why Elohim and Yahweh is different. Temptation. How it goes, doubt, deception, desires, disobedience. Process, chapter 3. This whole picture of chapter 3. How's temptation really come into make sense to the person? Doubt, deception, desire, disobedience. And then we have the temptation here. Now to compare what has been said in Genesis 2:17, when the first command was given, what the woman responds. The original command was that 2:7. This is the original command. You must not eat from the tree. But the woman, when she is discussing it in verse 3, she says, she asked it, you must not, what's that? Touch it. What does she seems to be doing here? What's that? By adding it, right? Absolutely. Adding it. Perhaps she's fearing that God needs some protection. I need to climb up one level on this hierarchical structure to look after God. He's not strong enough to look after him. Maybe some insecurity in God's power. So she asks anyway to the command that was given. Portrayal that we have here, by the way, of men and women, male and females, comes off a lot of better for the female than it does for the male. The female enters into dialogue with the serpent. She shows us that discernment. She saw that the fruit was, okay? Fruit was. It says in verse 6, good for food. There was physical benefit for it. It was a delight to the light in the eyes, okay? It's beautiful, aesthetic benefit. And it was desire to make one wise. It had intellectual benefit. So she's thinking and heard in the dialogue and responding, what's the place of the male here? The verse I kept passing over. I didn't want to read it, but I did. I guess chapter 3, verse 6. She also gave some of the fruit to her husband, and who was with her. One word in Hebrew. That was one word Hebrew. Who was with her. Okay? That means Adam is not that far from Eve. They're very, very close to each other. Adam, he first heard from God, right? And he didn't really kind of be aware of what God's command. He just followed what his wife said. The stuff that he said, took it. Again, certain discussion between serpent and Eve. Adam, where Adam that time? Is gone? No. It's just they close to each other. One word in Hebrew again, who was with her. I didn't like that because I'm male. I'm a man. But what it says here, what it says is Adam heard the discussion. He knew what was going on. He was the one in the original text, in the original story, who had received the command not to partake of the fruit, but he did not say anything by then. He just ate. What do you think man's here? Males here. An Old Testament scholar, Phyllis Trible, has said the portrayal of the man in the garden is not the portrayal, or my pronunciation is not good, right? Portrayal, we pronounce this one. Rick. First word. This word.
Portrayal.
Portrayal. Okay, portrayal, sorry. Of patriarch. Whereas the woman is depicted as alert, intelligent, and sensitive. The man comes off as passive, bland, and belly oriented. There's also, Dutch scholar goes in trouble. Think about what Adam did. Another way of looking at this in a particular event is through the psychology of human development, which was developed by Erik Erikson. It has several stages of human development, and what the first stage of human development? It is experiencing basic trust as babies. We don't try, but we learn to trust the parents that look after us. And what the temptation here in Genesis 3, the serpent says, can you trust God? Did God really say? Is that really the truth? You won't die. Trust me. Don't trust God. So he's attacking them at the first level of human development, and obedience becomes rebellion. They see that it is good and they look for instant gratification, not